By the end of its wordless opening, with the music soaring to an emotional climax most shows don't even achieve in their entire runtime, I was hooked by Arcane. This show is ambitious animated storytelling without compromise, something that rarely ever happens in the realm of animated television. The fact that Arcane is a video game adaptation might not even cross your mind while watching it, which is probably a good thing considering its, origins. That said, it's legitimately the best video game adaptation ever created. And its score, a brilliant mix of orchestral hybrid and pop music, shows it's possible to pull off an outstanding soundtrack while blending genres. So buckle up because there's a ton to dig into here. This is the music of Arcane. Like many of my favorite shows, Arcane spans a wide cast of characters with distinct ideologies and weaves through their stories seamlessly without making definitive statements on their moral rightness. Even so, each of these ideologies is scrutinized by the consequences of the characters' actions. The botched heist in the first episode acts as an inciting incident for the entire show, with a domino effect of consequences. It's also in this scene where we as an audience are confronted with the show's overarching themes: class, privilege, and progress.
Oh. It's nice getting above it all, huh?
Piltover represents one of the two major settings of Arcane's first season. Coined the City of Progress, Piltover represents an attempt at a utopian society, a city built on the foundations of science to ensure a good quality of life for its inhabitants. It's also characterized musically by one of the show's most recognizable leitmotifs. A percussive string ostinato breaks into a massive orchestral tutti, with layered rhythmic harmonies in the winds. These layered ostinati create the musical effect of clockwork gears, oscillating and bringing to life the enormous mechanism that is Piltover. Underneath, the brass and timpani fill out massive chords, shifting between E-flat major and a quintal C stack fifth chord, musically representing the vast facade of the metallic utopia. The melody floats over top in the choir and strings, much like the dirigibles that populate the city's cloudy blue skies. A shift to C-flat, the flat 6 in the otherwise E-flat major melody, gives the impression of Mixolydian flat 6, a mode often used in film music to convey a sense of majesty and wonder. In other scenes, the ostinato is utilized to represent Jace's arcane crystals. The crystals that become the catalyst for the technological progress that makes Piltover a global superpower in a matter of years. Act 2 opens with Piltover having seen massive advances in science and commerce due to Jace's hex tech, and thus the theme is reorchestrated as the city is reintroduced on the eve of Progress Day. The chord progression now rises, conveying a feeling of triumph and grandeur. Now, the orchestral score isn't the only brilliant music in Arcane. In fact, when clicking on a video about Arcane's music, it probably wasn't even the first thing that came to mind, was it? That's because Arcane is absolutely stuffed to the brim with amazing pop music, too. A decision that elevates the show's broad appeal while also its themes, characters, and settings. There's no better contrast to the show's grand introduction of Piltover than the introduction of the Undercity.
Who told you it was down here? Come along if you wanted a piece.
Playground presents a complete reversal to the setup of City of Progress. Instead of a lush orchestral tutti, the audience is greeted with a dark, pulsating synth soundscape, with distorted industrial percussion and of course B. Miller's evocative vocals. The shift to this much darker texture is complemented with a shift to a much darker modal scale as well.
Welcome to the playground, follow me. Tell me your nightmares.
Phrygian dominant melody is a far cry from the much brighter Lydian flat 6 scale heard in the Progress theme, and its chromaticism and augmented seconds give the Undercity a mysterious edge. Like Piltover, the Undercity is reintroduced in Act 2.
Taste what fell from grace, wanna taste what fell from grace.
After Silco's takeover, Zaun is much more dangerous than before, and appropriately accompanied by Bones UK's edgy and percussive Dirty Little Animals. Where Zaun lacks a melodic identity, it creates its own diverse identity through these insert songs, mirroring the precarious melting pot of the city's inhabitants. Equally as important, though, is how these insert songs play with the narrative of the show, and establish a musical precedent for the episodes to come. Historically, orchestral music in media is intrinsically linked with the European classical tradition, with many of the earliest film scores being written by composers from the realm of opera. And while orchestral music carries with it a certain degree of timelessness, it also carries the baggage of this classical tradition, one often rightfully seen as snobbish, elitist, and gatekeeping from the general public. It was the music of the upper crust. But by the mid-20th century, music had become more accessible than ever to ordinary people, with the advent of jazz, blues, and then rock developing separately from orchestral music. So this contrast of orchestral music and pop music has an added connotation outside of the music itself. It demonstrates the central class struggle of Arcane's story. It's no coincidence that some of the most memorable scenes involving the Undercity's residents, or the Zaunites as they'll come to be known, are underscored with songs instead of traditional orchestral score. And the result is exhilarating.
I declare war on anybody standing in the way of what I dream for. How could you ignore the ones that are voiceless, scream from the poor? In this gothic underground city, we all sin. If I bring a couple rounds with me, then we all win. I came back and brought the crown with me. The king.
This idea pairs perfectly with animation studio Fortiche's aesthetics. Having made multiple high-profile League-related music videos between Get Jinxed and the viral hit KDA Popstars. So they were absolutely primed to deliver amazing results when asked to create multiple music video sequences for Arcane. But what's amazing about this show is its ability to weave in and out of these pop music sequences without feeling unnatural. And this is largely because of the attention composers Alexander Temple and Alex Seaver paid to building a consistent sound world. That said, credit never stops at just the composers on a production of this scale, as orchestrators, mixers, editors, and assistants all play a huge part in bringing a gigantic score like this to life. Alright, at this point I've said about all I can say without getting into spoilers, so here's your one and only warning. Jinx.
Kills Dumbledore.
Consider yourself warned.
Oh, I forgot. These were in my pocket.
One of the other major recurring musical themes throughout the show occurs exclusively in scenes focusing on Vi and Powder. Presented with a duet of female vocals that likely represents the pair, this winding theme accompanies the sisters as their relationship develops from one of loving friendship to confusion to madness throughout Arcane's 3 acts. It first appears as underscore in episode 1, while Vi promises Powder that
This city's gonna respect us.
the sisters' theme returns upon Vi and Powder being reunited near the end of Act 2.
Oh, Powder!
This time, however, the bright-eyed girls from episode 1 are gone, and so is the hopeful, triumphant tone of their theme's earlier arrangement. The harmony, which plays out over a droning low E, is somberly orchestrated in the strings as the vocal line reappears. A solo violin playing artificial harmonics joins with the vocal duet, creating a fragile texture for the confused and unstable Powder.
Things changed when you left. I changed.
Are we still sisters?
Nothing is ever going to change that.
Its final appearance in the last episode of Arcane during Jinx's tea party is its most bleak.
Where should I sit?
Once a duet, only a solo vocalist sings now, as Vi is alone in her fantasy of being sisters again with Powder. The theme is then hijacked by even more unstable strings and tense sul ponticello tremolo, harmonized in dense chromatic clusters as Powder starts to have another mental breakdown.
No, she's not saying that.
There's no coming back for Powder at this point. In fact, including these last two cues, Jinx is often accompanied by a solo violin as a sort of timbral leitmotif, meaning a sound associated with a character rather than a specific sequence of pitches. Considering violinist Ray Chen is a featured performer who's also credited as a music consultant, it's reasonable to assume Arcane's composers utilized his expressive playing to represent the show's breakout character. Here's just a few examples.
So come across the river and find.
I can't lose you.
Why did you let me? Because you're a jinx!
Where Arcane reaches its peaks, it's truly at the pinnacle of animated storytelling, and these are the moments where everything comes together. In the last episode of each act of Arcane's 3-act first season, there's a scene that I like to refer to as the showstopper. The scenes with the most heightened emotion in the story, accompanied with incredibly dramatic imagery and a fusion of song and score. Separating the orchestral score and pop songs to represent the Piltover topsiders and the Zaunite Undercity dwellers works brilliantly to frame the class conflict, but when these styles fuse, Arcane truly takes flight. This is not a simple world with a clear black and white rich versus poor story, and thus having moments that blend everything together musically is important.
Why did you do this?
I was saving you.
The first showstopper comes at the end of episode 3, after the disastrous attempt to break Vander out of Silco's facility. We hear a chord progression creep in as Vi abandons Powder in the rain and smoke of the burning warehouse.
Please come back, please. I need you, please.
And after Silco resolves to take Powder as his own, Ramsey's goodbye begins, closing out Act 1.
We will show them all.
The 4-chord progression we heard earlier in the score returns in layered vocals before building to a climax with a wall of strings, synths, and vocals. Notably, this progression uses a major 2 in a minor key, creating an unnaturally dissonant-sounding ascent as the 5th scale degree sustains through each chord, accenting the conflicting and fraught emotions. This is also the first time we hear the orchestra join one of the pop songs, proving the events that transpired here are bigger than the Undercity or Piltover. They're going to affect everyone in this story. Our Act 2 showstopper comes in Episode 6 as Powder lights up the flare that Vi gave her in Act 1.
Wherever you are, light it up, and I'll find you.
As Caitlin and Vi escape Silco, the Piltover enforcers prepare for an all-out confrontation with the Undercity. In this moment, the conflicts have begun to converge in a major way, winding together Powder and Vi's struggles, Silco's fragile rule over Zaun, and Piltover's even more fragile government-enforced peace. Woodkid's Guns for Hire boldly asserts itself over this montage, with dramatic string orchestra accompaniment and chromatic harmonies. In fact, Guns for Hire uses the same major 2 chord that we encountered in the first act's Goodbye. This elicits a similar feeling of tension, but also neatly ties into Vi and Powder's most traumatic experience. The temperature has risen to a boiling point in Arcane's story, and Guns for Hire provides a compellingly dramatic underscore with a more forward fusion of orchestra and song this time. Finally, the Act 3 showstopper. More literally this time because the show actually ends after this one.
I thought maybe you could love me like you used to.
The final scene in Arcane's last episode, and the massive cliffhanger that rounds out Season 1, is underscored by Sting's now iconic What Could Have Been. A descending line in the lower octave of the piano implies a minor 1 to minor 5 to major 4 progression in F Dorian mode, a mode often used in film scoring to evoke loneliness or ambivalence with its unique combination of a minor 1 and major 4.
I am the monster you created. You ripped out all my parts.
This pairs perfectly with Jinx's conflicted mental state and feeling of isolation at the end of the story. However, the harmony begins to shift to a more resolute F minor as Jinx resolves her inner turmoil with what she's about to do.
I hope you know we had everything, and you broke me and left these pieces. I want you to hurt like you hurt me today, and I want you to lose like I lose when I play What Could Have Been.
The layered vocal harmonies harken back to Goodbye, but here Sting's elegiac vocoded tones pair with a driving perfect fourth in the piano, giving it extra weight. Following some delicate harmonics from the solo violin, the harmony leaps dramatically as Jinx fires her rocket. The harmony suddenly shifts to the minor 4 and modulates to B-flat minor.
What we could have been.
I love this short bridge not only because it foreshadows the final key of the song, but the way it modulates back to the original key with a very specific chord. Now, this C major chord works as a pivot chord, creating a major 5 to minor 1 perfect authentic cadence leading back into F minor. But this C major chord has a different function within the key of B flat minor. This is now the third and final song where this major 2 appears, tying each of these songs, and by extension these moments, together harmonically. What Could Have Been also features the most active orchestration of any of the songs up to this point, with featured violin soloist Ray Chen answering vocal lines with expressive responses, leading to the full orchestra fittingly joining the chorus as Jinx's rocket blasts towards Piltover.
I hope you know we had everything, when you broke me and left these pieces. I want you to hurt like you hurt me today. I want you to lose like I lose when I play What Could Have Been.
Alex Seaver, also known by his stage name Mako, has an amazingly informative video detailing the creation process for this song, as well as his and co-composer Alex Temple's philosophy behind the composition process of Arcane. There's one big takeaway in it that I'd like to highlight.
The really tricky part about working on this show is that we intentionally wrote all the songs to picture, almost like we were film scoring them. which creates so many challenges. And Seb and I really struggled from song to song trying to figure out exactly what the puzzle pieces were.
This needs to happen way more often. Giving the writers of a pop soundtrack the ability to score to picture is a massively underused but tremendously effective technique. Traditional score composers are used to scoring to picture, that's the bread and butter of the job. But pop soundtracks are almost always created separately and music edited in to fit a sequence, or the sequence itself is edited around the song. What Alex Seaver says here is a huge part of what makes Arcane's music so unique and seamlessly integrated throughout the show, and Arcane is the perfect example of how this approach can dramatically elevate every aspect of a scene. I'll pop the link to this video in the description because as a composer I find it fascinating. Well, that's a wrap for this one. Go watch Arcane if you haven't already. I've tried my best not to annoy my friends to watch it literally every time I talk to them because I know what it's like to be on the outside of a hype train, but it's actually that good. I know it's been a minute since my last upload, but I want to thank all the boatload of new subscribers who've hopped on board since then. I appreciate every like, comment, and subscriber that I get, so if you dig what I'm doing here, feel free to do any of those things. Arcane Season 1 was apparently in production for 6 years, so by the time Season 2 airs, maybe I'll have another video up. Okay, anyway, bye!